Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 25. I first just want to give an extra thank you to all of the amazing guests I had last month for our Pride series. So thank you again to Mara, Christine, Aiden, and Shelly. But I also really miss this, just sitting down with a microphone, figuring out a topic that is going to help you, dear listener, make your writing life easier. So I am so glad to be back. This week, we are talking about decision fatigue, which was inspired by Mara's mention of it in my interview with her and Christine, which was episodes 21 and 22. If you haven't listened to those yet, you don't have to before you listen to this, but it's definitely a great listen. But before I even get to why making decisions is so damn important for writing books, I wanted to give you a quick update on how things are going with me. So June, I got to start master coach training, and I'm finishing up my very last week of the very first month of the 6-month training, and it has already been so amazing. One of my favorite takeaways so far has been this emphasis that the trainers put on us learning to trust our own decisions and our own wisdom, and to not constantly be sort of like looking to teacher to tell us the right way to do things. Every time we ask a question, we have to say what we think our answer is to kind of teach us how to really, think for ourselves and figure out what we think we want to do. And often I found I end up not posting many questions, because when I do that, I figure out the answer and I don't actually need help. And another really fun thing was during one of the coaching sessions as part of Master Coach training, I mentioned while I was getting coached that my brain kept telling me, which this is going to sound so dramatic, but this is how my brain is. And if you're listening to this, you can maybe relate. But my brain was telling me that my whole world was going to fall apart if I stopped working. Or you might insert for you if you stopped writing, like everything's going to be terrible if you don't finish this book, and yada, yada, yada. Maybe it's just me, but I have a feeling that I'm not the only one. And one of my fellow coaches, she did such a good sort of twist and was able to show me that actually, when I'm thinking that my whole world will fall apart if I stop working, what actually happens is that my work falls apart because I'm making it my whole world. And just my mind basically exploded when she said that. And I have put it on a sticky note, which you may have seen on Instagram, and it is living on my desk because it was just such a shift for me. And I was just like, of course, when I don't give myself time off, my work suffers in the end. And it's like obvious. This is what I teach my clients, but it's always so true that what we teach is what we also need to continue to learn deeper and deeper for ourselves. So with that little nugget, I actually took the entire weekend off and I didn't do a damn thing. And it was just so glorious. And then, so now it's Monday as I'm recording this, and I'm excited and energized. I had a great writing session this morning, and I am like ready to go and really work really hard this week, because I know, one, my evenings are off with the exception of client coaching sessions, and my whole weekend is going to again be off, and I'm taking a half day on Monday for the 4th. So I don't know, it just makes it so much easier to kind of put the energy and effort in when I know I actually have time set aside to really rest. And it feels a little funny to admit this on the podcast, because this is literally what I teach. But sometimes we need a reminder to take our own medicine. So anyways, the other thing I wanted to update you on was that this past month, I made this decision that I've been working with my clients, and I love going really deep on all of the mental stuff, all of the burnout and the imposter syndrome, and feeling like you're not a good enough writer, or feeling like you don't even count as a real writer, and sort of all of the stuff that is the bedrock of this podcast. But as I've been working with clients, I realized that while the mindset stuff is so, so important, obviously, I wanted to actually be able to dig into their actual books with them. So I am currently also getting certified in book coaching through Author Accelerator, and I've been able to use what I've learned in terms of how to use sort of coaching skills and apply it to actually helping folks with their actual books and figuring out what is the heart of the story and how do we set it up so that, I mean, writing's never going to be easy and it's never going to be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect first draft, but I'm learning how to help them shorten the amount of drafts they're going to have to go through to get to that right story. So I'm super excited about that. And I know my clients have really loved it so far. So if you are listening and you're like, man, I really do want a life coach. This sounds so great, but I also really want someone who can help me with the actual story, who can help me plan and figure out revision, what exactly needs to change, who's actually going to read my book and give me feedback. Hey, I am now also that person. So I am a book coach and a life coach, and I blend that so beautifully with my clients. And I'm not even going to apologize for being like, it is beautiful. It's beautiful. It's great. It's the stuff I really think all writers need, whether it's your first book or your 15th or your 50th. Writing a book never really gets that much easier because we're always pushing to learn and grow and develop. And having somebody who can be there with you, who can peer inside your brain on both the story aspect and all of the unhelpful wiring we've been taught from the patriarchy and white supremacy culture and toxic capitalism that like wraps up our self-worth with our ability to produce, we can pull all of that apart and it makes writing much more fun. All right, so enough about all of that. I want to get to today's topic, which is why decision making is so important for authors. What I really want to focus on is why that matters so much for writers and how many decisions we're actually making as we craft a story. And as the title of this episode sort of alluded to, I called it 1,000,000 micro decisions. I think we make just almost an infinite number of decisions when writing. So we need to have tools for those times when we have those sort of bigger level decisions, or to really know when they're just like, yeah, our decision-making power is tapped out. So for this, I'm going to use some examples from the revision I was working on the first half of June to illustrate sort of the depth and breadth of story decision-making. And so if you've been following along at all, I've mentioned before that I am drafting my next novel, which I affectionately call my gay ghost thriller. And at the end of May, beginning of June, somewhere in there, I don't know, time has lost meaning. I reached the midpoint in the book, and part of that is I would have paused anyway to revise at that point, because that's sort of how my process has evolved. But I also got to a point where there were so many open decisions that I hadn't made that I could not keep moving forward. So I kind of recognized that and I was like, okay, I need to step back. I read through the first half of the novel so far, and I just sort of kept some notes for myself of what I wanted to change or just things I needed to decide. And once I was finished, I compiled those notes, and some of them were just like, make sure this thing tracks through, name this character, but some of them were some pretty meaty decisions. And when I added it all up, there were more than 30 decisions that I needed to make about this story and the world and the plot and the characters before I could figure out how to make the sort of first half of the book really solid and work. So 30 decisions, some of them were relatively small, but others had vast ripple effects throughout the rest of the book, and partially because they had to do with like suspects and motives and the victims in my thriller narrative. Some of them where I had open decisions about how my main character's magic works and what exactly sort of spurred her magic out of dormancy. There were also decisions I had to make about the killer's thought process and how they were choosing their victims. And actually, as a fun thing, I got to use the tools that I teach in my Create Better Characters masterclass to sort of figure all that out. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, I will have the link in the show notes because it was super helpful. And it's always fun when I get to use my own tools. Part of the reason why I actually had to stop drafting was because there were so many open decisions. The last thing I wrote before I went back and revised, it was almost all in brackets. It was sort of like, well, if I do this, then this would happen. But if I do it that way, this thing would happen. But actually, I should probably do it this other way. So it was just sort of like, you need to make some decisions or else this book is just going to fall apart at this point. So that was part of how I knew I needed to step back. But I want to note that decision making as a writer isn't just confined to the revision process, and it's not just confined to sort of like the early brainstorming stage. While there were those sort of 30 decisions that I didn't make as I was drafting, there were easily 10 times or 100 times that many decisions that I had already made as I was plotting and as I was actively drafting. Things like relationships between characters and different magic that people would have in the story and the different family dynamics. And even when we're writing itself, everything is a choice. And every choice is a decision. Every word, every paragraph break, every decision of what to put in dialogue versus what to put in narrative, what's worth describing and what isn't, all of that is a decision. Where to enter your scene, where to start, where to end. Like all of those things are decisions, and they require varying amounts of energy because they're varying sort of levels of decisions. But each one pulls from that finite amount of decision power that you have in any given day. And also, I want to note and make space for the fact that energy can fluctuate day to day or week to week, depending on so many factors, like the amount of sleep you got or how much stress you're under, how close you are to burnout, the general state of the fucking world. As I'm recording this, it has been a few days since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, so there's lots of rage and anger and sadness. And for some folks, that completely depletes the ability to make creative decisions. And for some, writing becomes that the escape of like, I can't figure out how to solve this political crisis and like human rights crisis, but I can write this scene with these characters being dumbasses. So depending on how you respond to those things, there is no right or wrong. If you need writing to escape or if writing is like the last thing you have energy for, both of those are okay. Because we have so many decisions to make as writers, we need a process that will allow us to make good decisions quickly and then implement them without all of the typical second guessing that we might do. And that, writer friends, is what I have for you today. So there are 4 main steps to making, I guess, decisions in general, but specifically we're going to focus on story level decisions. And those are step 1, recognizing when you're in an open decision loop, otherwise known as recognizing that you need to make a decision in order to keep going. Just knowing that a decision must be made. So then step 2 is we need to make peace with the following truth. There is no one right or perfect decision. Step 3, then we will brainstorm some possible answers. And then step 4, we choose our favorite solution and we stress test it. And you could argue that the 5th step is implementing the decision, but that's kind of a post-decision step, so we're just going to stick with these 4. All right, so we'll dive right in. Step 1, first we have to recognize that we're even in an open decision loop and or we need to make a decision. So you are typically going to realize you need to make a decision when you find yourself stuck, you're unable to write forward, or you find yourself sort of writing in circles and the story is going nowhere in particular, or the character has sort of become reactive, or the type of plotting where it's like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and there's no kind of cause and effect trajectory. So for Ghost Thriller, I knew that it was time to stop because while I had put smaller decisions in brackets as I was going that I could come back to later, which, pro tip, love to do that. I will very often put in brackets like character name TK or, insert description here, cool name for this character, go back and figure out what the heck she was wearing and put that description here, describe the house, whatever. All that, notice a theme there. Most of my shit is, I don't know, I got to describe stuff and I don't know. I'll deal with it later. So that kind of stuff's usually not a big deal. But when I start putting things into brackets that are big decisions, like how many people the serial killer murdered at a single time, like that my character is going to stumble upon and find, I need to know, is that one person? Is it 3? Like that vastly changes what happens next. So deciding those circumstances needed to happen in order for me to have an interrogation scene that wasn't just all placeholder. Plus, I knew at that point that the decisions that I made around that scene were really going to determine the pace and sort of the setup for the second half of the novel. Like, was it going to be really focused on investigation and figuring out who was behind it and clue finding? Or was it going to be this sort of like, oh no, people continue to keep turning up dead, there's a killer on the loose, we're in danger, kind of thrillery more situation. And then another way to tell you have open decisions, if you don't have something obvious where like, well, I didn't decide that yet. Sometimes it's just this general feeling of being unsettled, or maybe your anxiety is just a little higher than normal, which this may depend. I'm a very anxious person. I have anxiety, so your mileage may vary on whether or not that's a sign for you. But just anything where you've seen that you're delaying figuring something out, or there's just like, I don't know, you just feel really unsettled. Like there's like, I just can't figure out what's not working. Often that means that there's some decision about the world or the character or the plot or the emotional arc that you just haven't decided. And once you make that, things will start to click back into place. All right, so once you know that you need to make a decision, that brings us to step 2, which is banishing your dreams of this perfect solution. This is by far the biggest block I see for my clients, is thinking they have to find the right or the best or the correct or the perfect answer. In fiction, and honestly in life in general, there is no one right answer. And one of the reasons why we tend to believe that there is a right answer, or we don't want to risk getting it wrong, is because we've been taught not to trust ourselves and to always be looking to an external authority for the answer. And if you take a wild guess as to who we're taught has that authority, ding, 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 it is the white supremacist patriarchy. We always think of like old white dudes. I don't know why I always come back to this, and I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, but just like walking down a medical college admin type wing and just big oil painting pictures, whatever, of all the past like presidents of the college, and they were all old white dude, old white dude, old white dude, all the way down. And it's like, we are very inundated to believe that there is one type of person who has the answer. And we are taught through the way our schooling system is set up, and no shade to teachers, I love teachers, but our system is set up to award us for being able to regurgitate the answer and be able to learn something and spit it back out. We're not taught to see failure as a learning opportunity. You got a, bad grade and then you should feel shame about it. It's typically how a lot of us are raised. So the moment we let ourselves believe that there is a right answer to our novel's problem, whether it's, again, plot, world building, character, doesn't matter, and especially if we believe somebody else has it, if I could only talk to Isabel, she could tell me the right answer. When we do that kind of stuff, we shut down our brain's ability to be creative. But the good news is that this doesn't mean it's all over for you. You can always choose to think something else. And there are some great ways to do this. And basically, it's just asking yourself really good questions that don't dead end you. So you could ask things like, if it could be anything, if anything could happen next, what would it be? Or, if there were no wrong answers, what could I try? Or do the flip side and okay, what happens next? Wrong answers only. And let yourself write down all the things that you don't think happen next, because it helps your brain see that it is okay to write down wrong answers. That is not dangerous or bad, or you're not going to be mean to yourself because you wrote down something that wasn't perfect. And I really do recommend doing this on paper wherever possible, so that it is, or paper, or your phone, your computer, anywhere that it is out of your brain to where you can look at it, and sort of like, even if you like tactile stuff, if you want to put it on sticky notes and sort of be able to move stuff around, whatever your brain likes. But I really recommend trying to get it out of your brain, because when it's in your brain, it just swirls and swirls and swirls. And the amount of times that I have been thinking about an issue in my book for days and days, and I can't get anywhere, and then I finally sit down and like write out, okay, I know it's not this because of X, Y, and Z, and I want to make sure it includes this, and I start writing those things down. Usually within 20 minutes, I have my answer. It's annoying how many times I forget to actually sit down and write it down, because if I just let it spin, it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so once you know you need to make a decision and you are okay with like, there is no perfect decision, now we get to move to step 3 and actually start brainstorming answers. So if you had to answer some of those questions in step 2, you're already halfway there. And you might already even have a solution that you like. If you don't, then you're going to keep going. Just keep making a list of possible things that you could do to solve whatever. Possible reasons for the magic, possible meet cutes for your character, whatever your sort of genre or sort of missing decision is. Write down stuff, and there are some things you'll write down where as soon as you write it down, you're like, no, that's not it. And I want to invite you to use that moment where you're like, oh, no, that's not it. Not to beat yourself up, but to celebrate that gut instinct, to be like, I can just tell, I just know that that's not right. And see that as proof that you do have story instinct. So I want you to celebrate that instead of get frustrated that you only have ideas you don't like. So you're going to keep doing that over and over and over until you sort of find something you like. If you do find something you like, you'll move on to step 4. And my favorite is when you sort of get an option, you're like, ooh, like that's really interesting. Where could that go? That's usually a good sign you want to go ahead and start stress testing the idea. If you, on the other hand, find that you are stuck and you just are spinning out and you just cannot get any traction, this is where we take a step back. It's fully possible, especially if you're working on these decisions for an extended period of time, or maybe it's at the end of a work day, or you just have a lot on your mind because of the state of the world. It's fully possible that your decision-making power is just really low right now. So we can step away, go for a walk, do something that's fun, and really give yourself some space from the idea. Don't actively think about it. Like really set it down and go do something else. And that is often a great way to re-spark that creativity. This actually happened to me recently. I think it was literally like the day after I recorded the podcast with Christine and Mara. I was working on these edits and making these decisions for my ghost thriller, and I was really stuck on a key piece of the characters. I think I mentioned earlier, like why her powers had started then, like what made that the exact right timing. And I just couldn't get there. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. Like the baby's at daycare. I'm just going to take like a quick little nap and just chill. And I kid you not 60 freaking seconds after I like laid down on the couch, my brain went, oh, here's the answer. Of course, it normally does not happen that fast, but in this case it did. So I typed it up on my phone real quick and then I actually took the nap. And I think this is so important. It's why I bring this up, is this isn't something you can always hack. I think if I had decided to nap with the intention of that being the thing that came up with the next idea, I don't think it would have worked, because I truly like let go of the reins. I just was like, I am done with this. I'll pick it back up tomorrow. My brain was able to go, here you go. And then I rewarded it by actually letting it rest. Once you finally do have that idea that you like and you want to move forward with, we are going to step into step 4, which is where we stress test the idea. And basically we just ask a couple of questions to make sure we're not accidentally breaking things. So before you dive into the manuscript, we're gonna stress test a little bit. Now, of course, some decisions are not going to require this level of like detail, but for big things, anything that's key world building or character decisions, it's helpful just to check the decision before you start running off and doing it. So the first thing you'll want to ask is, does this decision break any of the story logic I've already set up? And if it does, then ask, is it worth it to reorganize and sort of revamp what I have in order to implement this decision? Because sometimes it is, especially in a first draft, especially when you're doing sort of a big developmental edit. Sometimes we do want to break apart what we already have in order to put down stronger foundation. But sometimes it's just taking the story in a different direction. It just contradicts something that's more important that you already have set up. And so you let that idea go. And you'll brainstorm more and see if you can find a solution that doesn't break what you have. And I think the key here, and this is where you're going to have to really tap into your story instincts and your own self-trust, is knowing that distinction. And I can't tell you, it's so nuanced. I can't tell you when it is and when it isn't. Like you have to, as the creator of your story, parse out whether it is breaking something that's worth breaking, or if it is breaking sort of the heart and soul of your book. Because those things are going to be things you want to protect versus, well, I had this really fun little thing that is no longer going to make sense. Well, then I can cut that. And that also brings me to kind of a whole other tangent that I won't fully go down, but that is why it's so important to know the point of your book, to know what you're telling the story for. Like, why are you telling the story? When you know that, you know what not to break. And that is part of what I help my clients with, is figuring out, okay, why this story? What is the point of it? And then every decision can anchor back to that. Okay, so once you have an idea that does not break your story logic or breaks it in a way that you're okay with, and you've sort of figured out how to account for that, then your second question is, what is the ripple effect of this decision going forward? And the thing is, there should, in most cases, be a ripple effect. Again, stories, when they're the most compelling, it is not a story that goes, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. There's no cause and effect there. You want everything that happens in your story to mean something very personal to your main character, and then that causes them to do something else and have a sort of an effect on the rest of the story. So your decisions are very likely going to have a ripple effect, and it's just helpful to know what those are. And do you like that ripple effect? Like, is that going to create the story you're trying to tell? And this is actually my favorite part of the revision process, when you can track these decisions forward and see what's going to shift in the story. I live for this. I've said before, I kind of hate drafting. It's kind of the worst. I love revision. And for me, the absolute best moment is when I can see the decision rippling forward into the rest of the novel and ways that actually solve other problems that I haven't tackled yet or other decisions I haven't made. Like, when that happens, it is absolutely magic. And part of the reason why it's magic is that it doesn't happen every time. So when I do that and the moments it does, oh, it's so good. I had this with the latest decision-making round for the ghost thriller. I made one decision and it solved probably 4 or 5 different open issues I had. And let me tell you, I felt like a genius. I think I mentioned this when I was talking to Aiden. I just felt like the most brilliant revision goddess who had ever walked the planet. And I really let myself sink into that and sort of own that feeling for that moment, because drafting for me is typically so just ugh, I just don't like it. And I'm going to want to work on that story I have around not liking drafting, but it's very rare for me in the drafting stage to have those moments where I'm just all of the pieces in line and I'm like, oh, I'm a genius. They don't happen that often. So when they do, I hold on tight and I'm just oh, I am just going to bathe in this feeling for a minute because it's fantastic. All right. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place today. It's been so, I don't know, I just missed you all. So I just feel like I have so many things to say. Anyway, so once you've made all of your decisions that you need to make, I implore you, please, please, please write them down somewhere where you won't forget them. I actually like to keep a Google Doc for every book that I'm writing that's, decisions for book title. And then I refer back to it often because, one, I just have a lot going on in my brain and I'm not very good at remembering things. And two, also just writing a book takes a long time. Even if you have a good memory, it could be weeks before you get to that point in the story where that decision actually comes into play, especially if it's a decision you make that's going to ripple forward and we won't see the ripple effects on the page for a while. You want to be able to refer back and go, what did I decide about that? And then pull it up and all right, there it is. And then you can keep going. So to review, one, it's not even avoid decision fatigue, but sort of how to make decisions, because we just have so many decisions to make. First, you just have to notice that you need to make one, whether it's you actively know there's something you've been avoiding making a decision about, or you just sort of feel off about the story. And then 2, remind yourself that there is no one right decision. And then 3, once you really own that in your heart that there's not one perfect decision and you just get to be creative and find all the different possibilities, then you can brainstorm without feeling so trapped. And then once you have your favorite decision, just stress test it and make sure that it's not going to break the heart of your book. All right, that is it for this week. Thank you for sticking around for all my little ramblings. I am so glad to be back with you, and I have some really exciting episodes planned for the rest of the month. So until next time, my friends, happy writing. Ready to break up with burnout? I can show you how. With my unique blend of book and life coaching, I help writers craft stories they love, all without the imposter syndrome and perfectionism that gets in the way. Go to isabelsterling.com/coaching to learn more and schedule your free consultation. Until next week, happy writing.